Are you ready to thrive? As a trauma therapist, author, yoga instructor, and healed human, I personally and professionally know what it means to live stuck in survival mode. I've learned a few things in my healing journey and my career that can help you transform into your best self. Join me, Rebecca Kase, as I use neuroscience, psychology, spirituality, and personal experience to help you find the tools and techniques to thrive. Hello, hello. Welcome to the first episode of Thrive the Podcast. Thanks so much for joining me. Let me share a little bit about who the heck I am. My name is Rebecca Kase. I am a licensed clinical social worker, which means I am a professional counselor. I am a therapist. I am a trauma expert, and I own a company called Kase & Co., which specializes in trauma training, specifically EMDR Therapy, which is an evidence-based treatment for PTSD. We'll talk a lot about that on this podcast. I'm also a yoga instructor. I've been practicing yoga since I was 15 years old. It was the first time I set foot into a yoga studio. I am also a published author. I published the book, or rather W.W. Norton published the book, Polyvagal Informed EMDR, a neuro-informed approach to healing. It is a very technical, academic, applied neuroscience book for therapists, specifically EMDR therapists. And I'm also someone who has healed a lot of her own shit as well. So I'm not only a professional who specializes in trauma therapy, I'm also someone who has been on her own trauma healing journey and who has come a really, really long way. So this podcast, Thrive the Podcast, is all about thriving. And I decided to start this podcast because I do a lot of academic training. So I own a trauma training company. I teach pretty regularly. I'm online doing virtual courses and classes for folks around the country, around the world. I train a couple of days every month and do a lot of professional consultation. And I'm very accustomed to the field of counseling, to the field of psychotherapy, and to the kind of academic culture that comes along with that profession that has a lot of pros and a lot of cons, to be quite honest. And I decided it was time to grow beyond the confines of professional continuing education in the world of psychotherapy, because it can be really limiting. As someone who walks the walk and talks the talk, meaning I'm not just a trauma expert who understands what academic texts in the field says and what research and articles say are the best ways to heal and grow. But I'm also someone who has really embarked on her own spiritual journey, on her own healing journey, and who has learned to use neuroscience and a lot of tidbits from the field of counseling, along with everything I've learned about yoga and everything that I've learned about physical health. And I've really been able to combine a lot of those pieces so that I could live my best life, so that I could move from a state of surviving to a state of thriving. And in my professional career, I'm able to talk a lot about what research says, what scientific journals say, what academic texts say. But the field of psychotherapy is also full of kind of patriarchal values, and it is a healing community that is based in white supremacy and power. You go back to where the field of counseling started with Freud, and it was about some white male sitting in a chair listening to someone lying on a couch share all of their vulnerable experiences, and to be judged and to be diagnosed and to be told, well, this is the thing that you need to do to get over that. And of course, the field of psychotherapy has come a very, very, very long way, but it's still a colonized approach to healing. It's rooted in patriarchal values. It's rooted in power. It's rooted in white supremacy. And it's just not all encompassing. And quite honestly, the field of psychotherapy, of academic psychotherapy, is still, a lot of that stuff still permeates throughout the field. And again, I'm not bashing the entire field of psychotherapy. I'm not trying to bash anything. I'm just trying to be very real and authentic about some of the limitations of kind of the number one go-to technique that we have when we're saying, I am suffering emotionally. Go to therapy. Yes, go to therapy, but also recognize there's a lot of other things you can do beyond and above going to therapy. And so the field of psychotherapy is a place that I'm very comfortable practicing, and that's my profession. But given all of my own healing that I've done, I feel that I can offer the world a whole lot more than what is available in the field of psychotherapy. As someone who knows a lot about neuroscience, who has published a book in applied neuroscience, as someone who is a trauma expert, a licensed therapist, also a yoga instructor, and someone who has really done a deep dive into her own personal journey of transformation. That's what this podcast is all about, is combining, integrating neuroscience, psychotherapy, and spirituality into a framework in a platform where an expert is not only sharing kind of best practices available in the field, but someone who is also saying, I have gone through this journey myself. And while what worked for me may not work for you, maybe there'll be a couple of helpful tidbits along the way in these episodes that do help you grow, that help you move from a state of surviving to thriving, and that help you transform into your best possible self. So with that, welcome to Thrive the Podcast. And let's dive in and talk a little bit about what the heck thriving is. What does it mean to thrive? So as I was thinking about this podcast and starting this podcast, I really started to ask myself, how would I define thrive? How would I define thriving? And I did a lot of Googling on the internet, and I asked some friends and family members, and I journaled and I meditated on it. And I thought a lot about it. And I don't think that thrive can be summed up into one definition, because I really feel that thriving is a state of being. Just like I couldn't sum up what is happiness into a concise definition that everybody could relate to, I don't feel that I can really sum up what is thrive into one concise definition that everybody can relate to, because it's very much a state of existing. It's a felt experience, meaning you kind of know if you're thriving or if you're not. And it's about how you feel inside. And it's about how you feel about your life. And it's about how you feel about your relationships. And you're the only person that is able to set the bar, the standard. You know what A+ is for yourself, for example. You know what a D- is. You're the only one who can set those standards. So therefore, you're the only one that can say whether or not you are thriving. And if you do believe that you are thriving, you're the only person that can say, here's the evidence that supports my statement that, yes, I'm thriving. Or here is the evidence that says, no, I'm not thriving. And you are also the only person that can say, if I was thriving, this is what would be happening in my life. So thrive is very much a state of being. It is the outcome. It is not do X, Y, and Z, and you're going to experience the state of thrive. That is not what this podcast is going to be about. This is not about me trying to project or tell you what to do or how to do it, because you're the only one living your wild, precious life. So you live your wild and precious life in the way that you think is going to make it as wild and precious as possible. But to thrive is about the culmination of a number of habits, a number of behaviors, of mindset, that all together, the sum of all of it allows you to thrive. So it is an outcome. Here's some definitions of thrive that I found out there online, as we all think about what the heck does it mean to thrive and how might you define thrive for yourself. So one definition is to prosper and flourish. Thriving can be defined as a state of prospering or flourishing, indicating growth, success, and overall well-being. In this context, an individual, organization, or community that is thriving is experiencing positive development, achieving its goals, and enjoying a high level of overall prosperity. So here we have some key terminology around prosperity, well-being, flourish, grow. Another definition is to adapt. Thrive can also be seen as the ability to adapt and to grow in the face of challenges and adversity. So this definition really emphasizes resilience and the capacity to not only survive difficult circumstances, but to use them as opportunities for personal or collective development. Amen. Can we say that one again? This definition emphasizes resilience and the capacity to not only survive difficult circumstances, but to use them as opportunities. So in this definition of thrive, we really see that we're able to take kind of the shit that life gives us and find some way to use it as manure, to compost it, so to speak, so that you can turn it into something that allows you to grow and flourish. So here's another definition of thrive. One final one is about fullness of life. So a final definition here of thriving pertains to the holistic well-roundedness of life. It goes beyond mere material success and includes aspects such as emotional well-being, meaningful relationships, and a sense of purpose. Thriving in this context implies a balanced and fulfilling existence that encompasses various dimensions of the human experience. Various dimensions of the human experience. I think that's an important one to pull out here, because you can be doing all the things that you could possibly do to take care of your emotional well-being, but you are completely neglecting your physical well-being, and you are neglecting, therefore, a key component to your human existence. And so if you're neglecting one area of your human existence, you're kind of throwing it in the gutter. You're saying, I'm not going to pay attention to that. Let me not get any good sleep and eat, food that isn't really nutritious for me. I'm not going to drink any water, and I'm just going to live on sugary, caffeinated drinks, but I will take care of my mental health. I will go to therapy. You're probably not going to thrive, because us humans have multiple layers of existence. We are multi-layered, multifaceted, dynamic creatures. And there's a lot of things that go into our lives that contribute to our wellness, to our health, to our ability to thrive and to live our best possible life. So in this podcast, I'm going to talk a little bit about 5 key domains, 5 layers of human existence that I think are really important to focus on as you learn new habits and skills and techniques and behaviors and mindset that collectively allows you to prosper, allows you to flourish, allows you to live a life that you can say, you know what? I am thriving. And this is why. So I call these the Thrive 5. 5 key domains that I think are really important to focus on for your personal health and growth and development. One is physical health. So you have to be taking care of your physical body, this meat suit full of bones and skin and organs and cells that you travel through this life in. You better be taking care of it, or you're just not going to feel good. If your physical health is in the gutter, if you're not doing things to care for yourself, life is just kind of hard. So you got to take care of your physical health. Another key domain is emotional health, emotional wellness. So how are you tending to your emotional state? Emotions are not made up constructs. They're not fluffy things. They're not things to stuff down or get rid of. Emotions are simply neurophysiological happenings within your body. So you experience emotions because of things that happen in your nervous system and in your brain that create physical sensations in your body that you then put a label on and give a story to. So for example, when you say, I feel joy, you're using that word to describe a specific neurophysiological experience that you are feeling in your body. So there are certain physical sensations, and your mind might be doing something specific, and your breathing's probably doing something specific, and your heart rate is probably doing something specific. And all of that together, collectively, you say, that is the feeling of joy. Likewise, when you feel really sad or depressed or shut down or collapsed inside, your neurobiology is doing some specific things that you're sensing and you're feeling that collectively you slap the label on of I feel depressed or I feel sad. So if you wouldn't tell somebody to just get over an asthma attack, because that's something that physically happens in your body, you can't be like, get over that asthma attack, you wuss, just suck it up, buttercup, right? No, you wouldn't do that because it's a physiological event. So you can think of feelings and emotions as similar to the asthma attack. They're just neurophysiological events. And so if we're not tending to our neurobiology that is shaping our experience of feelings and body sensations and emotions, well, yeah, that's going to support you to thrive, or it's going to prevent you from thriving. So emotions is kind of domain number 2. Third domain of the Thrive 5 is mindset, is the mental game. You have this incredibly powerful organ that scientists say we only use a small percentage of, and it's called the brain. The human brain is the most complicated, complex, dynamic organ known to humankind that we still know very little about. It is so powerful. It runs the show. It filters every moment of your day. It is where your thoughts live. It is where your memories lie. It is where intellect and cognition lie. It is the ability to put people on the moon. Your brain makes it possible to learn how to drive. Your brain makes it possible to plan your day. Your brain makes it possible to plan your best possible future, or to play out your worst possible nightmare. So where you point that thing, how you point that thing, how you direct your thoughts is incredibly important for how you experience your life. So we're going to talk a lot about mindset on this podcast. Next is spiritual. So your spiritual health, your spiritual practices, research shows are very important and highly significant to how much life satisfaction you have, how much happiness you experience in your life, and how well you're able to overcome and rebound from adverse experiences, from trauma, from toxic stress, from terrible shit that happens in the world. Because it will for sure happen. That's just like part of this experience of being human. Terrible shit will happen, promise. And so research shows that those of us who have some kind of faith, some kind of spiritual belief system, are able to bounce back from those experiences and use those hard experiences as manure, as compost, as material for good that helps us to maybe feel a deeper sense of connection to God or to the universe or to nature or to Allah or to your dog or to your cat or to a tree, whatever you find to be your higher power. When we have a spiritual belief system, it allows us to maintain a more positive focus on life. So your spiritual beliefs, your spiritual practices also very much relate to your mindset. And all of that also very much relates to your emotional state and your physical state. All of these things are connected. And we'll talk all about this on this podcast, but it's not these experiences, these kind of domains for thriving don't live in cinder blocks. They're very much correlated and connected. And what's happening in one of these domains will affect the other domains. Now, this is not to say that you need to become religious. That is not what I'm saying at all, because there are a lot of people out there who say that they have a religious belief system, but they are not thriving. So do not hear that you have to become religious to thrive. Not at all. But we have to have some way that we make sense of life. We have to find something that we find purpose in, that we put faith in, a higher power, if you will. And so when we have a spiritual belief system, it is going to really support us live a thriving lifestyle. My spiritual belief system is very much rooted in Buddhism and yoga philosophy. So that's what you're going to get some infusion of here in this podcast. And then last but not least is also your relationships, your community, your connections. We as humans are hardwired to connect. We are social creatures. We are born without any ability to survive on our own. In fact, we are one of the only animals that comes into this lifetime with no survival instincts. We cannot find food on our own. We cannot care for ourselves. We cannot protect ourselves. We cannot keep ourselves warm or shelter ourselves. So therefore, our neurobiology is designed to connect and form relationships with others. Doing so is a biological imperative. Meaning, if you don't connect to someone, or rather, when you're little, if someone doesn't connect to you, your chances of surviving go way, way, way down. This is also one of the reasons that attachment trauma, sometimes called developmental trauma, sometimes called complex PTSD, overall, if your primary care attachment people in your life were not very safe, caused you trauma, caused you a lot of stress, did terrible things to you, quite honestly, it can really F us up because of how our neurobiology is wired. So we are wired to connect because it's so important for us to survive when we're itty bitty. But we also are able to connect in a way that allows us access to more resources to regulate our body budget or our nervous system. So because we're able to connect, because we're designed to form social bonds, because we're designed to have relationships, your nervous system is capable of being influenced by someone else's nervous system. So think about a time in your life in which you were around somebody that was just making you really, really anxious. Maybe you weren't anxious about anything in your own life, but their anxiety, their emotional state started to affect your emotional state. Or you might also consider, on the flip side, people in your life that whenever you're around them, you just immediately feel grounded. You feel soothed. You feel calmed. That person in your life, when things are really hard, you just really want to give them a phone call and check in, and just hearing them validate you, or the tone of their voice, or just seeing their facial expression is just like an immediate, whew, yeah, I'm better now. So that happens because our neurobiology is hardwired to connect and form relationships. So relationships can be the greatest thing for us. Relationships can also be the worst thing for us. So this is why heartbreak feels so visceral. Getting your heart broken, going through a broken relationship, ending a relationship, when we lose people in our lives, is a visceral experience. It is so hard. It hurts so much because you're wired to connect. Additionally, if you weren't wired to connect, the first time you ever had your heart broken, you wouldn't have dated again. You would have been like, never mind, peace out. That really sucks. That is not worth how terrible it feels afterwards. I'm not going to do it again. But yet we go back and we continue to look for partners and form relationships over and over and over and over and over again, because it's part of your biology. And so therefore, your relationships, your connections, your community is hugely impactful on your ability to thrive. So this is the Thrive 5. And this podcast, all of our episodes are going to be kind of focused on these 5 domains and how we can build habits and skills and, form new relationships and look for ways to make sense of what happens in the world through these 5 key domains. So I have a question for you. Are you surviving or are you thriving? Just notice what your immediate instinct, gut reaction is to that. And if you're not sure if you're thriving, then the answer is you're probably not. Because when you're thriving, you know. You just know what you know, what you know. I used to be living a life in which I was surviving. I was not thriving. And I lived this way for a very long time. I was kind of chronically anxious. I had a lot of panic attacks pretty regularly. I used to have PTSD. Thank goodness that is healed, because that's some rough shit. I used to have a lot of drama and chaos in my relationships. A lot of my relationships were a continual point of distress. I have been in toxic, abusive relationships. I've had some really terrible friends. I've had some really terrible partners. I have lived a life in which I said that I valued my emotional wellness and my mental health, but I wasn't really walking the walk and talking the talk. I wasn't doing the things in my life to actually care for my emotional wellness and care for my mental health. I was chronically depleted and exhausted. Always felt like I had too much energy or not enough energy. I felt like I was questioning a lot of things. I was like on this continuous search, this desperate search full of thirst and hunger to just find the answer or find the solution. It was a state that it's not one and the same as seeking or being curious or, being in the pursuit of wisdom and knowledge. It was like this frantic, grasping, clawing for something because I was so lost and I felt so terrible inside. My body felt awful. My sleep was always messed up. My nutrition was kind of flipping, flapping. I was using drugs and alcohol to regulate and get through the day. I was surviving. I was here. I was alive. I mean, surviving is a precursor to thriving. You got to be alive to thrive, right? But I was just kind of going through the motions. I can definitely say I was far from living my best life. I was far from being my best self. And so I'm grateful for that part of me that was searching and frantically grasping and clawing, because it's that part of me that kept me looking outward and saying, it was like that part of me that was able to recognize, like, this isn't it. This isn't it. And I was so dissociated on some level from being able to just do a real personal inventory and look at myself and say, how are you contributing to all of this distress? How are your choices adding to this state that you are finding yourself in? How are your habits contributing to you feeling stuck and at a loss and chronically anxious or chronically depressed? I mean, yes, I was kind of doing that, but it's really hard and challenging and vulnerable to truly take a personal inventory and get real with yourself and to say, I'm really doing a lot of things to muck things up for myself. My choices are probably not the best choices for the life that I want. Now, I want to be very clear and just state right here that this podcast is not about ableism. This podcast is not to say that we all just need to suck it up, buttercup, and pull ourselves up by our bootstraps and like it's all about you. No, because there are micro and macro levels of experience that are contributing to the current state of our life. So the micro level is kind of about the Thrive Five and the things that you can do, the power and control that you have over your life to shape the current state of affairs. But that's not to discredit the impacts that the macro level systems have. So things like power and privilege and oppression and racism and sexism and transphobia and a lack of equal equality and a lack of access to affordable healthcare, a lack of access to healthcare, a lack of access to resources, living in a very dangerous area, living in poverty, struggling with chronic sickness or illness, or, none of us choose our family members, really. So these are all things that are outside of our control. And yes, absolutely create challenges and barriers to one's ability to thrive. But what you do have in your control is greater than the things outside of your control. What you do have in your control is greater than the things outside of your control. No matter how much privilege you have in your life or how cushioned your life is, there will be hard times. And some people have been marginalized by the system, by society. Some people have certain hands that they're dealt that are harder than other people's. Absolutely. But to thrive, just because you have privilege, just because you were handed a lot of money and you grew up in a really safe area and you had a, solid nuclear family, and you can have all of those things and still not be thriving. Just because you have wealth doesn't mean you're going to thrive. It might give you more accesses to resources that will allow you to thrive, but it is not a here you go on a silver platter. To thrive, you have to show up to your life. Thriving is not a passive process. Thriving is an active process. Thriving is the outcome, rather, of you being active in your life. So when I was living in a state of surviving, well, not all of that was my fault, I should say. There were a lot of things that happened to me, like trauma, for example, that I did not ask for. that was put upon me that impacted my ability to thrive. Absolutely. But what I did with my trauma, the choices that I made of how I was going to show up to my trauma or avoid my trauma or what have you, was having way more influence than the thing that actually happened to me or the things that actually happened to me. And so that is going to be the focus of our time together, is looking at the control that you do have to shape your life, looking at the control that is in the palm of your hand that allows you to thrive, because no one else can make the choices that will allow you to thrive. Only you can do that. And it is all within your power. So as I ask you, are you surviving or thriving? Go back to that answer that you immediately gave as I ask that question and ask yourself, how do I know? So what is it that tells you you are in that kind of surviving category or the thriving category? And I really encourage you to turn this into kind of a mindful reflection, to sit down and really think through it. Journal, maybe write it down, turn it into a couple of days of reflection and get really specific. Nobody else is going to read this list but you. So you put on there whatever it is. And then if you were thriving, how would you know? So if you were living a thriving life, what would be different? What would feel different? What would be happening in your physical body? What would be happening with your emotions? What would be happening in your relationships? What would your spiritual belief system look like? Or how would that show up for you every day? And what would your mindset be like? What would be happening in your head? So these are the things that we'll be diving into throughout this podcast. I hope that you'll continue to join me as we move into our next episodes and dive a little deeper into what it means to thrive. And I'll also say that what you need to thrive is different than what I need to thrive. So I am never, ever going to say, do this because it will for sure do this for you. No, because your neurobiology is different than my neurobiology. And ultimately, this is about finding the right concoction, the right mixture of ingredients that allow you to thrive. I will certainly be sharing with you what some of my go-tos are, some of the ingredients in my concoction in my recipe book, in hopes that they may invite some curiosity, or that maybe something works well for you, or it takes you down a kind of bunny trail of things to further examine and try out for size. But just know that what works for you is going to be individual to what works for you. And so I encourage you to focus on the things, the habits, and the techniques that get you closer to being able to say, yes, I am thriving. Additionally, we'll be exploring, once you get to a state of thriving, how do you maintain that? How do you expand it? And how do you protect it? Because while I can say I'm thriving now and I'm living my best life, I can also say that I am certain that there is hardship ahead, that I will experience physical challenges, that I will get sick, that people close to me will die, that there will be crises, that there will be societal discord, that lots of things are going to happen. And I want to try and maintain a thriving lifestyle for as long as possible, so that even when those things happen, when those hardships happen, when additional traumas happen, I'm sure there'll be some other traumatic stuff that happens in my lifetime, I'm going to be more likely to bounce back from it. That I don't end up sliding completely back into a state of surviving and lose the state of thriving. So I hope that you'll continue to join me on this podcast. Thanks for tuning in to our first episode on Thrive the Podcast. Thank you for joining us on another episode of Thrive the Podcast. I hope these insights inspire positive changes in your life. If you're ready to take the next step in your Thrive journey, check out goodies linked in the show notes and on my website, RebeccaKase.com. Sign up for my newsletter and get access to helpful resources, connect with my community, and be the first to know about events and happenings. Remember, your journey from surviving to thriving is unique, and you have the power to create your best life. Subscribe, share, and thrive into your potential. Until next time, this is Rebecca Kase, signing off. Thrive on.